Okay, so this is the last part in our four-part series about the origin of the kingship inside of Israel. And today we're talking about Israel's greatest king, that being Jesus, who isn't just the king of Israel, but the king of the world, the rightful ruler of the world. But just to recap real fast, we started off with the message about Israel's demand for a king. You remember they went before Samuel and they said, "Give us a king. Give us a king." And Samuel said, "No." Samuel talked to God and God said, "Yes, give them a king." And so a king was provided for Israel by the name of Saul. So King Saul was the first king of the nation of Israel. And this is the ironic thing. King Saul was exactly what Israel expected to receive. He was big, he was strong, good looking, met all the requirements that you would want in such a ruler. The thing was, he wasn't a man who was obedient to God. And so God later on replaced King Saul with a man named David, who he deemed a man after God's own heart. The type of person that God really wanted to have ruling the nation of Israel. But David himself was not a perfect king, as we know very well from the stories inside of the Bible. And even though he's a man after God's own heart, that he didn't fully meet all the requirements, all the standards that God had set for somebody who would rule over his people. And thus, another king had to be appointed and prophesied and expected to come that would rule the nation of Israel in true righteousness. And we'll get into that here shortly. But first, what I want to talk about is this whole idea of the standards that we have for kings and what that always seems to result in. Historically, there have been many kings throughout history, and I did a quick study to find out what were the looniest kings in mankind's history. These weren't necessarily people that you would have looked at and said, okay, this person's a goof, but they proved it through their actions. A man by the name of Rudolph II, Holy Roman Emperor. This isn't particularly weird, but a little bit extravagant, I guess. He collected lions, tigers, and orangutan. And this is what I love the most. He even had a live dodo bird. A dodo bird, okay? So dodo birds, of course, are extinct now, but he had the luxury of being able to own one back then. He did some good things. He laid the foundation for the scientific revolution by supporting Kepler and, Linda, you might need to help me, Brahe, okay. So those were good things, but he was kind of just shooting in the dark, though, honestly, because he also supported things like astrology, alchemy, and mysticism as well. So he figured he'd just support him all, and one of them would turn out well, he supposed. The Zhengdi, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, the Zhengdi Emperor of China. This guy's an interesting character. He was a very gullible man. One time he ate a bowl of gruel rice, and as he was eating it, he was told by his cooks that it was actually cooked pearls. So he ate this up, and he just believed it. He's like, I'm a king. I ate pearls. Of course, I'm royal. Why not? But my favorite aspect of his life is he liked to order around an imaginary twin general of his on the battlefield that he called Zhu Shu. So imagine him on the battlefield. Hey, Zhu Shu, you see that army over there? I want you to take those guys and get them. The army's just looking at, what on earth is this man talking to? So Zhu Shu's his fake twin brother. Maybe the most notorious of all kings throughout history in terms of his sheer lunacy, Caligula, the Roman emperor. I had to shorten this guy's list significantly because I could have gone on for quite a while with all the things that this man did. For one, he was a very insecure and hairy man to the extent that he banned people from mentioning the word goat within his presence. Very bizarre. He practiced making mean facial expressions. I don't know if he had a mirror or something, but he would practice making mean facial expressions so that he could strike fear into the hearts of his men just by looking at them. A little bit. Probably my favorite thing that he did, though, is that he invested in building, and he did build an extravagant house for his horse. And I'm going to try its name. It's either Incitatus or it's Incitatus. And after he built this house and his horse was living in this house, he even tried to appoint his horse to the high office of consul. Pretty interesting. He failed, by the way. He was assassinated before that could happen. We can only imagine what would have happened had he succeeded in doing so. Rome would have been an even more interesting place. So these people, lots of times, by our eyes standards and our ears standards, may have met the standards and the expectations that we would have for a king. But you dive into their lives and you're like, I think we made a mistake with this one. People have expectations about a king, about what a king should be like. And as I said, Saul is a man who met all of these qualifications, and in his own right, he wasn't necessarily a bad king. But David, he looked just like everyone else, essentially. Nobody particularly important. He was a shepherd boy, so kind of a rugged, cowboyish type of figure that just had a normal, everyday job. And yet David met God's qualifications for what he was really looking for in king. And it wasn't that God made a mistake with Saul. Rather, it seemed to me like he was trying to teach Israel something. Particularly, don't look at the external appearance of the person who's going to be ruling you. Look at the heart. That's what I do. King David actually kind of reminds me, the perception people would have had of him reminds me a little bit about a specific political figure a few years back. He never really made any serious inroads. Well, I guess that's debatable in terms of the world of politics, but that of Ben Carson. He was a man that their first complaint against him was that he was too soft-spoken to be able to speak with world leaders and for them to take him seriously. My response to that is, if he was the President of the United States, he has the strongest, most powerful military at his disposal. He doesn't have to speak very loud to get people to take him seriously. And so we have these standards of what we expect in our rulers, our governors, and so forth. And they can oftentimes either be shallow or just totally miss the mark. Where somebody like that, who knows, maybe he could have been a really good president. Not to push any sort of agenda here, but, just thinking about character-wise. Just the same, people should have recognized King Jesus when he came to the world. We were discussing this in our Bible study this Roman, particularly Romans 1, verse 3, that says that Jesus would be a descendant of King David. It specifically says, as to his earthly life was a descendant of David. I find that very fascinating. Why David? Again, because this sort of model of a man after God's own heart and what that really looks like versus the standards and expectations of mankind. But what I really like, and one of the huge reasons why Israel should not have missed all of the signs regarding King Jesus, was that there are specific prophecies about who Jesus was and whose lineage he'd be from. In 2 Samuel chapter 7, we are given the prophecies given directly to David himself by the prophet Nathan. And he tells David, and I'm going to kind of break this down a little bit for you, just to kind of put it into context and tell you what he's talking about each statement here. It says, when your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, this is referring to David, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood. This is referring to David's son, Solomon. And I will establish his kingdom. And as you read on, you see that he does establish Solomon's kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom. One more word, forever. So everything in this verse is pertaining to David and Solomon until you get to that Interesting word, forever. Is Solomon going to establish the kingdom forever for God and in the lineage, the bloodline of David? No, because Solomon is merely a human. He doesn't have the power to be able to do that. He goes on in verse 16 and says, your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. And again, he's talking to David and guaranteeing him this promise that Israel would always have a king on the throne that comes from his bloodline. Now, you could think of it in terms of, okay, well, there's always going to be somebody on the throne related to David. Well, what's the problem? Well, we don't have that today. But God made an eternal promise with David to always and forever have a king on the throne after his bloodline. When Jesus came along, we see that he meets all of the qualifications to be the Messiah. He's a descendant of King David. But once again, they had all the clues, but they wanted a king like King Saul, not like David. And even then, in relation to David, Jesus took the idea of obedience to God to the highest level, not just the next level, to the highest possible level, which is infinitely beyond any standard of righteousness that David or any of the kings that came after him could have possibly attained. He attained just absolute perfection, holding to the letter of the law, not just fulfilling 613 laws, but also just upholding righteousness through love and peace and compassion. All the character qualities that should be inside of your heart as a believer are the qualities that Jesus had inside of him as well. So he didn't just look good on the outside. He was pure on the inside. And who would not want a king like that? Who would not want a ruler like that? And yet Jesus was not the king that the world expected. We are even told that he was even rejected and not wanted by the very people that he came to. And Isaiah tells him maybe one of the reasons for this is because he had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him. Nothing in his appearance that we should desire him. So the other day, this is, I think it was about a week ago, Jaden actually shared it with people. I told him, don't tell people about this. And of course, he gets to church and he tells people about it. I happen to get a traffic ticket, okay? It was a wonderful circumstance. I was at the post office, dropped off some mail, shipped out some mail. I drive down that little alley that's behind the post office, and I've lived in Findlay forever, and I've gone down this road 1,000,000 times, and for the longest time, it was a two-way street. I take a left turn, and as I'm driving down the road, I see two signs that say, do not enter. My mind's like, do not enter? And so oh no, this is a one-way street now. I take a left, but before I take a left, I look in my rear view mirror. So lights are flashing. And of course, I'm saying to myself, really? Now, I tell you what, it is the worst place in the world to commit a traffic violation in front of a police station. Don't do that. And furthermore, of course, when I took my left turn, where was I turning? Well, I was turning right into the police station's parking lot. So I was in good company there. To make matters worse, by the way, it wasn't my car. The address on my license was not the same as our current location. And so this officer is just thinking, okay, we really got to look into this guy. This is a shady situation. So it took about half an hour to get through all the checks and everything so I could go and have dinner, which was the only thing I wanted at this time. So in respect to this situation, the officer did the right thing. The law says justice. The law says punish those who do wrong. Well, as accidental as what it was, I did wrong. And I had to pay the price for it. I got a ticket. I don't think there's anything that was going to happen but to get a ticket right there. I mean, what is he going to tell his fellow officers if he let me off? Yeah, they all saw it, okay? But in my mind, the only thing that I wanted was grace. I just wanted him to understand I didn't do this to kind of cheap shot my way through traffic or anything. It was just a simple mistake. But the law doesn't see it that way. A mistake, your intention, does not matter when you violate the law. And this is the difference with King Jesus versus any other king in history. Kings, rulers, presidents, whatever you might have it, they have to uphold the letter of the law in respect to other people and punish and demand justice. You know, the funny thing I find for us is that we always want justice in this world until you see those lights in your rearview mirror. Then all you want is grace. Then all the things that you've done in your past, they don't matter anymore. You just want to be forgiven. But when you see somebody else who might have made a mistake, you want to see justice. King Jesus isn't like that. King Jesus looks different than every other king. He looks different from the king that we want. We naturally follow the king of the world as is described in Ephesians chapter 2. The ruler of the kingdom of the air. And in case you're unsure of what that means, it's referring to the devil. That naturally, that's where our heart's inclinations are. We want punishment for other people. We want a king who's going to exact justice in a cruel way, whose ways are selfish, whose ways look good but are full of deceit. Not that we really want those things, but for some reason we misjudge the character of the king that we really want because he looks so good. He parades as an angel of light. And that's attractive to us. We want something like that. Jesus is different. And you know what? It takes courage to follow a different kind of king. It takes courage to follow a king whose ways are not cruel but compassionate. A king whose ways are not selfish but generous. A king whose ways cause us to be honest and vulnerable with people instead of putting up walls so that people cannot see how we are deceiving them. And it's truly only through the work of the Holy Spirit they're able to follow after a king like King Jesus. And you know why that is? Because the type of king that we pursue, these different characteristics, cruelty, selfishness, deceitful, that's not just the king that we want. That's who we are on the inside. We don't really want these things in a king. We want a king like Jesus, pure, not just on the outside, but on the inside as well. And in order to follow a king like this, it takes faith. Please join me in a word of prayer.